welcome everybody. Today I am really happy to have William Ulrich, or as he is affectionately known as Bill, from the Business Architecture Guild. He's the president of the Tactical Strategy Group. Bill, and you've actually written lots of books, but today we are going to focus on your latest book, which is End-to-End Strategy Execution from Inception Through Solution Deployment. Did I get that right? I think I did.
Yes, you did. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I
So
have
I'm,
it here, so I have to look. Yes.
I'm actually quite excited to hear about it, to ask some hard questions, to really understand what was the motivation behind a lot of this, where do you see the future going, and what are the key snippets that we could share with the audience outside of this. And of course, for everybody that is watching, there are links available. You can access and find the book and all of that in the comments below. All right, so let's get started. Bill, can you maybe walk us through journey in business architecture? So what inspired you? Because you've been in architecture for a very long time now. It's not as though you don't know the field, but what inspired you to co-author this book? Because I believe you have co-authored this book. And how does this link to what you've done previously? I know that you have business architecture, the art and practice of business transformation. That has been quite a big book, especially with the Guild. So what was your thoughts?
Okay. I wrote the business architecture book to try to put some standardization around it. It timed it around the same time the Business Architecture Guild was formed in 2010. The goal was to get some standard approach where things were connected. That was my goal starting around 2008. In 2006, I'd been on a transformation journey for decades. And a lot of that transformation work leading into the 90s was IT related, but it started moving more and more into the business side during the 90s, and then more as we crossed into the 2000s. My work in business architecture, as I moved into that field, was not because I was a business architect or I wanted to be a business architect. It was out of absolute necessity because there was no rigorous representation of business ecosystems prior to business architecture being formalized. So it was actually a byproduct. And the Guild was formed because we needed some sort of an association, a not-for-profit, to build that structure or that framework and to give it legitimacy beyond just one person saying, this is what it looks like. There must be thousands of people a day who post the latest, best framework that you can have. We needed to give it legitimacy through membership and deployment and use. So that took 15 years. There were standards that I needed to support. That standardization started happening a few years ago. And we had to come to a common conclusion on what business architecture does. So at this point, the people who don't agree with the Guild approach are almost like the people who think that the earth is still flat. So we've moved beyond that. So now I could go back to what I originally wanted to do in the mid 2000s was to align strategy execution so that end to end we're driven by strategy and from a business perspective through the technology and then through solutions. So that was my original goal. I didn't get into business architecture because I had some burning desire to do that. I got into it because I had to do it in order to write the book that I wrote. So the top line motivation was that there are challenges with implementing strategies, with deploying solutions, with successfully deploying initiatives, and so on. So there's lots of challenges, lots of metrics, lots of quotes. We have the bulk of chapter 2 is related to all the issues. And we felt that there needed to be something that crossed end to end. And what's been out there historically end to end isn't really end to end, and there is no connectivity underneath it. And so that connectivity is the rigor that needs to be employed, not just the hand waving, but the rigor that needs to get you from, we need to set it this to accomplish this objective, and we need to deploy it. So that it was a multi-phase set of motivations.
Okay. And how long did it take you? Did you spend much time, or was it like you've learned it all and now you're putting it down on paper. What was
It was longer than my other books. There was my first book, I think I got done. There was a deadline. It was a Y2K book, and it was how to fix things and all that. But that was 6 months, but that was because there was essentially a deadline on my co-author and myself. This one took actually 3 years. And from what I'm going to say, the date of contract signature to the point where we had it out the door. And the reason it took 3 years was multifold. One is a lot of what's in here doesn't exist anywhere else. The framework, people will recognize. The business architecture pieces, of course, people recognize. A lot of the elements that we pull together in a cohesive form, people will recognize. But there was also a good bit of research that we had to go into. If you look at one of our chapters, has 50 different footnotes or endnotes to it. And then the other thing was connecting all the pieces together in a way that flowed. And the person I wrote this with, Charles Bowman, we actually worked together on a fairly major portfolio transformation. And he was one of the people, not the only person, but one of the senior solution architects that could take what I had put together on the business side and connect that on an end-to-end basis through deployment. And the different pieces in there, I know you recognize on dynamic rules-based routing and all those things. He was the first person to actually, another portfolio did adopt it, but he was the first solution architect that really embraced it and moved it through actual deployed source code. So I knew that we were aligned in our thinking. Of course, that's always said on paper, but then you have to work through it. But we had to put all these pieces together and we had to have it be cohesive and it had to flow. And we have to make sure all the things lock together. So that was why it was a 3-year effort. Most of the books that I've written were done in a year or less, even with or without co-authors.
Okay. And one of the things that you discuss, and we'll look at some real examples in a minute, but one of the things that you discuss is that you say, there is a bit of a legacy of failure among strategy to execution. I think that's actually one of the quotes that come out of this. And it hasn't changed much over the years. What do you mean by that? And why do you believe that this is a reality? And I want to ask you, how real is the failure versus maybe getting halfway? So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
A lot of it was statistically driven from other people. And there's a range of stats that we go back probably 10, 12 years, but it's PwC and there's a lot of named organizations that have come up with these things. So it's not things we made up. These are statistics. Now, the flip side of that is what's the personal experience on that? And my personal experience is that people do set strategies. Let's say they're done well, which isn't always the case, and I'll get to that. But if they're done well, people set strategies and they get cast down silos. So you'll see what sound like good ideas on paper end up being implemented in redundantly and not connecting. That I've seen in my own personal experience. And the end result is you didn't accomplish what you set out to accomplish, and you spent a lot of money. And you're still trying to spend that money, and year after year, that goes on and on. So that's my personal experience. That's experience that my co-author has had. But again, we're not making up these statistics. Like I said, we've got a lot of footnotes and references and things like that go into the depth on it. Also on initiative deployment. That's another one. And there were 25 years of Standish group studies, but there's a lot of others. So wasted investments, those come from a range of areas, MIT and a number of other areas. So when you put them all together, none of them are painting a picture of great success. They're generally painting a picture of underperformance on an end-to-end basis. Now, the other thing that we write about a lot is, and I hear it all the time from organizations I work with, the strategies aren't good. They are mandates, and they're mandates to do X or to do Y. And oftentimes, even though they're coming from business leadership, they're technology mandates. So deploy, for example, AI, right? Okay, what does that mean? Or we need the digital transformation. We need to do that. So we see all of these things that are go do this. And a lot of them are technical, some are not, but go do these things. And nobody says, why are we doing those things? Let's not rush into this. Let's find out, what are your business objectives? If you don't have business objectives and you just have mandates, you can do the mandate, but you don't know that you accomplished anything in a positive way. We follow pretty much, where we can, tried and true methodologies. So we use Norton Kaplan. Somebody could argue that's not the best, that's fine. And along the way, we use pretty much standard types of things you'd hear in business school and so forth. So we try to align as much as possible with the way people are doing things. But my experience, and it gets shared with me all the time, is, okay, and business architects say this, well, you said we should work off of these objectives. We don't get objectives. We get orders. And a lot of time those orders come to us and the pricing's already been set, or the funding's already been set for the initiatives. And then we're told to go help. But by that time, scope set, right or wrong, what we're going to deliver is set, right or wrong. There's no architecture, there's no design, there's nothing at the front end, there's no impact assessment. So we're just wallowing. So I have seen, and I talk to people all the time, nobody's telling me, yeah, everything we implement is always on time, on budget. We hit every spec and we execute on our strategies. The other quick point I want to add is most people don't keep metrics on this. So it's, if you went back 1 year and said, what did you actually implement that you committed to a year ago? Nobody wants to look at that, and nobody does. So it's, what if we only got to 40% of what we said we were going to do? Maybe that's not bad, but it's not 80%. So that's the other thing we try to encourage people to do, is to start tracking it today.
So there's two questions that I have for you from this. Number one is, I have found in my experience over the years that often projects are not, or programs or strategies are not actually about projects or programs or strategies or measures. They are about positioning. And so the measure almost is irrelevant. It's about the ability to get the project positioned for the next position that you want in the organization, or the organization you're going to next. And I think that is something that we never really discuss in many instances, because if we just go off logic, things that make sense, it would be obvious if we're doing this project. But in my experience, I learned this the hard way, was that I didn't realize that the purpose was actually positioning and the purpose was not actually delivering. And so have you had that experience? That's the first question. So we'll start with that one. And what are your thoughts on that? Because that almost means that the strategy would be irrelevant in terms of effort. And I think that happens more times than we think. What are your thoughts?
I agree. There's two elements to that. There's the culture and politics, which it doesn't really matter if we implement anything. There's different people involved. Some people say, I'm leaving in a year or so it doesn't matter to me. And that's, by the way, that includes executives who may not be around that long and then say, I don't want to invest in this thing on my watch because it won't be done in a timely manner. A lot of it is, we're going to do this, then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do this, and we never get to some end state. The other element to that is, a lot of organizations use systems integrators, and they're all about positioning. So I remember about 3 decades ago, I was working with a fairly large, well-known US government agency, and they had hired an integrator, a management consultant, and they wanted a method to do something. And so they sold them a study. And the study was going to lead to a follow-up where they were going to invest in the proof of concepts. And the proof of concepts were going to lead to another initiative. All of this was going to string out over a period of years, which would lead to them building something at some point. And then they were going to sell them additional things. So all of that was like a daisy chain of just, what they wanted, basically they wanted a light bulb, and they hired a team of people to study how to put in light bulbs. So I saw that, and that's not uncommon, by the way. And I was with a big 8 at the time, big 4 now, I guess. And I felt we weren't as guilty of that as some of our peers, but I see it all the time. So nobody, if you finish it, the goal is to go away. Their goal is to never leave and
Yeah.
keep having you spend money with them. My goal is to tell somebody something and get out of the way so that they can go execute. So we do see that with systems integrators, and it rubs off on the people that are in-house. And that's how they just think. It's never going to end, so we'll just keep doing this thing over and over again. So if you have business objectives and you have clear KPIs and you know what you're trying to accomplish, at least you have a target. That doesn't mean you're going to make it, but at least you've taken that part of the battle out of the equation so that you can move forward. Because if everybody does everything right, and in part that's following some of our recommendations, if you do everything right, the odds of not succeeding are still out there. What we're trying to do is get it to the point where you're increasing the odds of success and decreasing the odds of some major issue. And even if you don't fully succeed, at least it's not going to be one of these $50 million or $100 million, whatever you want to talk about, debacles. We cite one, and it's public. This is public information. It was initially 10 billion, then it was $16 billion for the Veterans Administration in the US that they were going to replace their patient tracking system. And they never did. I don't know where it is today, but let's assume that they built something, the prototype didn't work, and they were 16 billion in and still asking for more money. That's absurd. And they never should have gotten into that. They shouldn't have given them 10 billion in the first place because it's a patient tracking system, right? So I'm also finding out that same underlying patient tracking system, there's some vendors who are just putting front ends on that and selling it. It's because it's open source. They're selling it, and it's all wrong, and it's all a shame. And the fact that we should help our veterans aside, it's the way people do things. Now, not on that scale, but most organizations have something on a smaller scale that looks a lot like that. They don't succeed. Sometimes they get more money. They shouldn't. You have to demonstrate. And if you haven't done it, you should be able to figure that out at some point early in the cycle, not late in the cycle. So we talk about that, and I'm sure you have lots of other questions on some of the techniques at the other end. But just on scale, organizations need to figure out when they're failing more quickly than they do. Not at a micro level, but at a macro level. And they're not doing that. They're plowing forward with a lot of these things when they don't make any sense.
Yeah, I get that. I
Sure.
suppose the second question was, how do you define strategy? And the reason I'm asking this question is because, in theory, a strategy is something unknown. You have to do some measures, but a strategy is not about something that is so easy to plan. It's uncomfortable. It is something that inspires us to get out of our comfort zone and do something and take some risk. Now, there's levels of risk, of course, with any strategy, but most people think a strategy is our project, we're going to do another project, and that's a strategy. And that's certainly how I see people interpret strategy. What is your view of strategy, and what is an example of a strategy that you think would be good?
Okay, I'll start with some of the most, what I think are the fundamental building blocks of it. And it's not the whole strategy, but they're the building blocks. So you have your goal and your vision, that's good. And then I should have execute objectives that I can achieve, smart objectives, they call them.
Yeah.
And I should be able to measure my success against those objectives with key performance indicators. And then I should have courses of action that connect those pieces together. Now, that's at a most basic fundamental level. That's what we ask for when we say, can you give us at least your goals and objectives and KPIs and what you think would be courses of action, but those evolve along the road. Now, the strategy, that's not the whole strategy. That's the beginning of it, right? So you have to have some sort of plan to execute. If I'm going to have a plan to execute, I should understand the impact of these goals and objectives and KPIs and courses of action. I should also understand if something is going to change and look different in the future, what that looks like. And a lot of people don't do those two steps. They don't know the impact of what they're trying to do. And because they skip over that, because it's too expensive, they don't want to spend time. And then they skip over the part with what's different in the future that allows us to implement this strategy from where we are today. Is it our data? Is it our systems? Is it all of our technology? Is it how we execute? Is it other things, right? So when you look at those, you can lay out a set of initiatives that broadly that are going to achieve the types of things you set forth up at the front end. And there should be some plan and a roadmap. Now, the roadmap, we don't look at hard plans like traditional project planning approaches to, but we look at roadmaps toward moving towards the accomplishment and clear checkpoints and points where you can measure and see how well you're doing and how well the metrics are evolving and all the other kinds of things you look at. But that collectively is a strategy. And strategies change. The objectives might stay stable, but the path you take to get there may adjust. You have to build all that into the overall approach. But I see that whole big picture as strategy. But a lot of people think, and a lot of what comes out as you move down the pathway, we look at the strategy execution framework, are the courses of action evolve and get clearer and then decompose. And they look through a much clearer lens than what you had up at the front end, what you thought might have been the way to go. But until you did the impact assessment, look at the future state, and then rationalize the best approach for getting there, you don't really have that. So the courses of action do evolve through the life cycle. You can't really set them all up front, but you can make a best guess. So that's how I see the whole strategy is really the way to get there. It's the overall approach.
Okay. Because I have seen, what is it? A strategy is about how to win, not how to play. And I can't remember the author now, but he does a really excellent video in the Harvard Business Review on strategy and planning, and talks about specifically a strategy is not a plan. A plan is how to do the strategy, but they're not the same thing. And specifically, a strategy is a plan to win. You want to win. And he uses West Airlines as an example.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I thought that was really good. So it's good to get your perspective on what a strategy is, because I think that there's a lot of thought around what strategy is, but I don't think everybody's necessarily in alignment. So if we don't fully know what strategy is to start off with, you can imagine the execution is going to become hard at the end of the day. I do think like simple things like having which capabilities would be part of that strategy is really important. So when we look at it from a strategic level, we want to understand how the different parts of our architecture is being embedded into that strategy. And yes, that helps take us further, I believe. You also mentioned 7 deadly patterns. I'm very interested about that. And then what would you consider from those 7, pick one, which would be the biggest silent killer in terms of these?
That's tricky. My 2 favorites always at the top are culture, politics, and silos. There's 3 parts to that, right? So culture can change, but culture can undermine. Politics, certainly a major issue when they get intertwined. And then silos are both the cause and effect of culture and politics. And it's because there's no communication between and that can start at an executive vice president level or a senior director's level and move all the way down so that there's no communication between all the different groups that collectively need to execute against strategy. So when you execute on a strategy, and by the way, I do agree with your person that did the video, when you execute on a strategy, you have to execute almost as a rule, unless it's some tiny thing, you have to execute across silos in order to put a strategy in, which means there needs to be coordination and collaboration all the way down, not just at the top level. And you shouldn't discover that there's 3 other groups working on the same thing that you're working on, only they won't interoperate. So that's like a worst case scenario. So that's one of my favorites because I think it bubbles to the top all the time. So my second one is data being the weak link. And we see data as the weak link because people are ignoring it. People are not making the investment in data they need to make, and data is in terrible shape. And it's really twofold. It wasn't architected to do what it's supposed to do today. It's certainly not architected the way it's supposed to be architected for the longer term, especially looking at AI and those types of things. And then there's integrity issues with it. And people aren't investing in it, which is the other big element. They're not investing in it. It's not part of the strategic plan. the AI people that are out there are finding out that the data is not supporting what they want to do from an AI perspective. You can multiply that out times anything else you want to do. The data is going to undermine it. So I think those are my top two. There's a lot of other ones, technology. If we have a good strategy, we put together some plans, we've got good architects. The technology is problematic, but it's not something you can't overcome. You can move past it, right?
It's an issue, but not necessarily.
It's an issue, but it's not a showstopper.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those factors that fall in, but I think the two that bubble to the top are the culture, politics, and silos on the one hand, and the data being a weak link on the other.
Let's talk a little bit around your data. So how would architecture help with that, number one? And secondly, businesses continue to run. Bad data, good data, no data, spreadsheets. And this is everywhere. We've seen it in healthcare. We've seen it in really big businesses that they run off shadowware. And you hope the person's not going to retire because they've got all their spreadsheets that they're using. So I know that data is an issue. I started doing training on data back in 2000 already, or 2001 to be exact. But my question is more around, number one, what does this mean in terms of architecture? And is that conceptual data really where you're going with this? And then secondly, what is the so what? Because the business is still run, right? So, yeah.
They do run, most of them run pretty well. They do run into glitches. I think it's more of the where they want to go. And do they want to keep going at the level they're going at today with a mid-sized fund management company with 25,000 spreadsheets that without those, the systems wouldn't work. Global manufacturing company where the person stood up with all of his peers in the room and said, if our ERP system fails, it's an inconvenience. If our spreadsheets stop working, our assembly lines won't run anymore. And so that's a very real thing. So it's like, how can you build costs? And these spreadsheets are being managed by very young people. They're not the most senior person who's necessarily running those things. Name the system integrator of your choice, and they are happy to put a recent college graduate on site for you and charge you a small fortune by the hour for their services, and they are spreadsheet experts. And now you multiply that out times 100 people or more. And those are the people that now were in charge of your data, making it work. And they're working around the operational data and the operational systems. Because if those things all did their job, like they might have done, maybe they used to do 30, 35 years ago, you wouldn't have all this out there. So it started innocently enough that they just started building these extensions because the systems architecturally could no longer support what they do. My argument, and not everybody agrees with me, I have this debate. My argument is you should go back to the operational data and put a plan in place, an overall strategy. It needs to fit in the overall strategy. I'm not saying that, but a plan in place to, over a period of time, move to architecture and better data deployments that are, one, representative of your business ecosystem, and I'll talk about business architecture, and then two, are something that you can now build on strategically for the long term. So that's what I think people need to invest in. And that's not saying you shouldn't do a lot of other things in the meantime. In our book, we talk about decoupling shadow systems and retiring them and doing those kinds of things. We call it outside in transformation. So we do talk about those. And that's part of it, right? It's not only the only thing, it's part of it. But you need to have some sort of direction on your data. And I'm not seeing that out there. And even people who have been in it for a long time, senior data people who say, it's impossible. We're not going to deal with it. We're just going to keep doing real-time conversions with real smart tools, no problem. And you should have those tools. And I don't disagree with that. But is that a permanent solution when the data you have is redundant and poor integrity and you're missing data? And business architecture has something, as you're aware, called the information map. Those are your information concepts. Those are reflections of your business objects. Depending on your business complexity, you can have 60 to 80, sometimes more, but 60 to 80 business objects in your ecosystem defined in a business architecture. There's an information view on that. So that translates into 60 to 80 information concepts, we call them. Those are reflective of all the work you do against the things you work on. So those are your capabilities. And our idea, they are aggregated, but we have things as basic as agreement and customer, but we also have things for transportation companies such as routes and route segments, and networks, network nodes, and trip segments, and so on. So we build it out for each individual industry sector, and that is the representative of the overall approach that you have for managing your organization. We turn that into information map. And by the way, we mentioned it earlier, but dynamic rules-based routing also needs specific data that goes into your database. It's not flow-based, so it's data-oriented database. So there's things like work items and work tasks and events, time, and things like that, and decisions. A lot of that, there's nothing out there that captures that. So if you want to move what we consider, my co-author and I consider to be, into a new future, you should at least have a comprehensive view of that. You should have a streamlined, cleaned up view of what you currently have, and you should start moving your operational data to a more positive way. Now, again, we're not expecting that today or tomorrow. And people with short attention spans may not have invested in this. But we're talking about 3 years, 5 years, probably 10 years until you get to where you want to go. So some of these journeys take that long. It doesn't mean you're not doing all the other things that you need to do along the way. I would never discourage that. It does mean you need to look strategically at your data. In my experience, that's not happening today. And I think it's just because people get so overwhelmed with the immediate.
There's two things that I want to discuss with you, but the first, let's just quickly talk about, so the data that's not going to go away. It's not going to go away this year, next year. It's going to carry on forever. And so we might have to mitigate a way in which to manage it and the way in which to accept that sometimes the data is not going to be perfect. And I do agree that architecture can absolutely help stabilize some of these concepts, because by having, at least from a conceptual level, cross-mapping to other things like, let's say, your knowledge graphs, that allows for more rigor in the dynamic area of what's happening on the field, and then stabilizing it with some key concepts that we really understand to be important for the organization. So I think those two work really well together. And so this is where I'm saying there's almost like a difference between understanding what would be the perfect data versus what can we actually do today to actually make a difference for what we are dealing with, and the constant change that's happening. It's even worse now. And I didn't think I'd ever say it's even worse, but it is, because you've now got AI feeding your data and feeding you data. So now you've got more data and more data all the time. So what are your thoughts? Because we have to actually adapt all the time to what's going on. And that means that the data becomes redundancy almost as soon as it's created. So how does that get fixed?
Yeah, I don't discourage the use of these tools that bring together, and I don't want to say they cleanse the data, but they bring the data together in an aggregate form that can be then fed into other tooling. And so there's different tools out there for that. I don't discourage that by any means, and I'm supportive of that. But I don't think it fixes the underlying issue. And it certainly doesn't make the shadow systems go away. And it certainly doesn't fix the low integrity issues we have today. We can do that, but underneath all of that is the ugliness of our application and our architectures and our data and the shadow systems that pull everything together and are holding it all together. So that's what's behind it all. Again, there's good tools out there that can get us part of the way, or at least sustain us as we move forward. I still think that if we assume that, or buy into the fact that data is the highest quality asset we have in our organization, and most people recognize that we should have good, solid data that we can move forward, or at least target good, solid future state data that we can then act against, that's operational. And we can start to decouple some of these scaffolding and shadow systems and all those types of things that are out there, and start moving to something that's a much more architected set of solutions over the long term. It goes hand in glove with the architecting of the applications, or wherever we end up with what that technology looks like. We always have to continue doing those things. A lot of, by the way, those old systems, and I worked with old systems, they're very forgiving on data integrity issues. They work around them. And they're built to do that because there's been data integrity. Since there's been data, there's been integrity issues. We're not expecting perfection, but what we are expecting is a cleaner, leaner look at things like customer and agreement, plus all the other things that I've been talking about. And a lot of the code we have today, it's magnified and it's bloated because of the data. It works around the data, and it spends a lot of time trying to figure out the data. So a lot of that code is not necessarily functionally progressing our organization. It's essentially just trying to make sure you can get to the end of the cycle, get whatever needs to get updated, and then you let the spreadsheets do the rest of it. So we run into these issues. Whenever we're doing any kind of major transformation, we run into these integrity issues, and the business people have to be involved. For decades, they've been saying the business owns the data. Step up, but they're not stepping up. This is not an IT problem. No, IT needs to help with the solution and help design it and that. But it's not an IT problem. And business people keep trying to make it an IT problem. It's not an IT problem. It's a business problem. And so we somehow have to communicate, and this is the tricky part, the importance. I've had people look at me and say, so what if the data is bad? And then I have to explain, this person's going to get charged twice, or this thing's going to expire and it shouldn't have expired. And all the little things that happen, they have people sitting around fixing this whole thing. So what if those people go away? Where are those? I don't know. Some of these people have 50, 100 people sitting around fixing bad data on a daily basis. And are they going to retire? Are you going to lay them off? And what's going to fix that? I don't know that AI is necessarily going to step in and deal with that and your customers and all the other issues that happen. I think that people just need a long-term plan. It's part of your strategy, your overarching strategy, to bring data into the 21st century and architect it accordingly, build it out so that you have all the representation of business objects, because that's missing today. And then get some integrity in there, and then start to decouple all these things around the edges that, to me, are high risk. I wouldn't be able to, if I knew my fund management company or my manufacturing company is being run by spreadsheets, I wouldn't be able to. I don't know how. I think that it's out of sight, out of mind for a lot of leadership.
Yeah, I think because it becomes difficult. Do you know what I mean? It's too complex, and then you end up going for, okay, we'll get back to that. And I think that's why you end up with technical debt and shadow systems and all kinds of stuff, because it just becomes too hard too quickly. And so you say, we'll get back to that. And the next thing, something else is broken. All right. So it's been a very good discussion. There's maybe two things I'd like to just highlight and bring to the forefront before we close. So in the future, Bill, what do you see as being good with AI and architecture and strategy and execution? And what do you see as a block?
So we laid down ground our book in chapters 1 through 9. And then chapter 10 came along and starts talking about, if I do these things, can I use it from an AI? Can I leverage it with AI? And so there's lots of pieces. There's all the layers of AI. I prefer to start more simplistically. Everybody wants to go for this top level of agentic AI. It's going to do all the work for me, right? And I've heard people saying that to me last week. It's going to replace everybody and it's going to do all that. Maybe, but that's not happening today or tomorrow. Not with the architectures you've got. All the work we laid out, chapter 9, applies to if you want to move towards an AI. We call it a cognitive enterprise. So if you want to move towards a cognitive enterprise, there were two elements to it. There's the element of, can I use AI type approaches to do a better job on strategy execution? And frankly, I don't think organizations do a good job today. So I think we can use AI for some point, not just testing out our goals and objectives, but maybe even generating some goals and objectives if we got the right information. But let's leave that aside. But certainly impact assessments and certainly future state, I think we can teach AI some of these kinds of things. And it's certainly, we have all the right information in a formal knowledge base. We can do a better job assessing and aligning and synchronizing and maybe triaging all the proposed initiatives we have on a year in and year out basis in a more streamlined, aligned way where we're saying, all right, all the work that's going to go on this particular value stream, related capabilities, we're going to put that together because it has all the other things set. The objectives are the same. This is going to be different. They're going to have to work together on it. So we can start to use AI for some of those kinds of things. And then we talk about, if you take it all the way through, and we talk about dynamic rule-based routing, which is coming down from architecture through design, that we can then point AI technology to that as well, start producing some of that. The flip side of that is what we call the cognitive operating model, which is architecturally driven. Do the right things on the strategy side. And we start to look at selectively where AI can play a role, and we coordinate strategically to do that. So we look at a approach where we say, where are we going to apply AI? And the whole idea of bringing AI into the organization is an AI mandate doesn't do a lot of good for people. But if you can say, here's the areas where I want to focus it, and here's what I need to do to get there. And then you say, and I also want to use it over here on this side too. Then you can have a more of a cohesive plan for getting there. But right now, it's more of this hand waving is I need to catch up with all my competitors are on ahead of me, which probably isn't true. So there's a lot of hand waving around it. Good data, we talked about good architecture, and then starting to just
Bring it together.
architecture design solutions go to where we want to go. So it all fits into the same storyline, same framework, same pattern, just that the outcome becomes much more advanced than it was, let's say, 10 years ago.
I like to say that it moves from doing architecture, where architecture is a lot about how do we, let's say, create the designs for human consumption, create where actually we can use our knowledge bases, our architecture for consumption with AI agents or synthetic stakeholders, and actually get our architecture to do stuff. Not just us architecting, but actually that architecture to start being far more dynamic. And so when we do create a knowledge base, that knowledge base can work with agents and it actually can do stuff with the help from humans, of course, but that I can see with AI, that's really where it's going to go, where architecture becomes almost like a cornerstone aspect of your AI so that you can actually deliver using architecture, not just trying to put all the pieces together the whole time, which is exciting for architects, I believe.
I think it's exciting to look at what potentially could be done with a very robust end-to-end populated knowledge base with AI. I think people aren't even at the early stages of thinking that through.
Yeah.
And I think we talk about that in chapter 10 of the book, but I don't think people are even at the early stages of thinking that way. Because today we're doing things as archaic as we ever have.
Yeah.
250 projects being thrown at you and you don't know what to do with them. You shouldn't be in that situation. You need to create a situation where you're much more structured architecturally and formally and knowledge base wise, and then AI can step in and maybe play a smart role for some of those types of things, right?
Yes. Thank you very much, Bill. It was a good conversation, a robust conversation. I'm sure we can carry on. For your book, where do you recommend people go and find it and get access to it?
Sure. You can go to the Rutledge site and I can provide you a link, but the Amazon.com, other places that have books, I think we're trying to see what kind of penetration we're getting into the university systems. That's a different conversation. But Amazon.com, the books there are electronic copies, soft cover and hardcover, if you really want to get a fancy version of it, are all available. But Rutledge, which is the publishing arm that's publishing our book, not the ones that put the book together, but it's all under Taylor and Francis. But Amazon works fine if you want to go there. And then the people can get that anytime, order it. And people seem to be able to get that worldwide. I don't
That's
think there's
good.
any issues with it. Yeah.
And as I said in the beginning, we will also have links to it in the podcast itself. So thank you so much for your time, Bill. I really appreciate it. We can go on much longer. I have no doubt that there's a lot we'll continue speaking about. So there's some food for thought, and thank you for sharing, and good luck with the book. And I'm really looking forward to see what happens in the next couple of years with all the changes that are happening in business architecture. And by the way, on a positive note, and I can't verify the sources right now because I just can't remember offhand, but it appears like business architecture is growing, which I thought was a really good thing to hear. So it's been great having you, and well done on all the good work.
I concur, and I've seen that. My is anecdotal, but I do believe that is absolutely true. And as usual, I really enjoyed it, Deirdre. So happy to come back whenever.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. We'll chat soon. See ya.